not only a very important matter, but I will say a matter essential to our nation. I think this is the first time that we will comprehensively discuss. Of course, this matter has continually been discussed, is being discussed, is a part of our national life. But let me thank all of the sponsors led by Senator Ontiveros for bringing up this issue. In that light, Mr. President, I'd like to put on the record that I agree 100% on the outrage of any claim, and more so, any aggression, no, or any move against our sovereignty, our territory, or sovereign rights. I also join the good senators and sponsors in commending our frontliners. Yan po man ay Coast Guard, yan po man ay Bureau of Fisheries, yan po man ay private fishermen na naghahanap lang ng hanap buhay. Having said that, to the statement that we have no other choice, I feel that there is a need for a discussion because the Duterte and the Aquino administration did show that there are many choices and different approaches. So with the permission of the body and of course of the good senator, if I will be allowed to interpolate, I'd like to bring up the questions of who, what, and how we will be able to satisfy ourselves and do our duty as a legislative body. So may I ask the good sponsor, Senator Ontiveros, the Deputy Minority Leader, if I may ask some questions, please.
Yes, we'd like to recognize the Deputy Minority Floor Leader.
Salamat kaayo.
If she's willing.
I do, Mr. President. Salamat kaayo. And yes, good gentleman from
Well,
Tagigan
let me
Pateros.
start by giving my own stand on the issue, Mr. President, with the permission of the good senator. It's more of a discussion than an interpellation.
Yes, of course.
You know, as a person, as a member of the Senate, and more as a Christian, I really believe in the book of Matthew when he says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and everything shall be added unto you." I believe a nation that seeks God's righteousness, seeks his kingdom, you know, will be fulfilled in principle, in maturity, in territorial integrity, in economics and everything, no? Because what we need here is a comprehensive strategy. If you look at China, the United States, Vietnam, and Malaysia, klaro ang strategy nila eh. Pero when you look at the Philippines, question mark kung ano ang strategy natin. No? And that's my personal belief. So the first question I'd like to ask is that, who are the parties to the dispute in the West Philippine Sea? If I may ask that to the good sponsor.
Yes, Mr. President and good gentleman from Tagigan Pateros. There are many parties, many claimant nations in the whole of the South China Sea, including China and the Philippines and various others. But those who are particularly standing across each other in the West Philippine Sea, actually, Mr. President, dapat iisa lamang. Dapat tayo lamang ang Pilipinas. But China had continuously taken aggressive and disrespectful actions towards us over many years, so that finally, in 2012, the Philippine government took the action of bringing a case against her, against China, before the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague.
Yes. So allow me to pursue that. So is the good lady saying that it is only China who has been disrespectful or who we have a dispute with?
Thank you, Mr. President and good gentleman. No, in fact, there are other claimant countries in the whole of the South China Sea with whom we have had on and off also problems or troubles in the West Philippine Sea. There was a time, for example, that some of our Filipino nationals were involved in an incident with a Taiwanese fisherman. And that incident caused the unfortunate death of the fisherman and caused tensions to arise between the two governments here in the Philippines and in Taipei, and there needed to be diplomatic negotiations in order not only to address the immediate problems brought about by that unfortunate killing, but also to come up with rules moving forward of how to avoid similar incidents and address them if and when they should ever recur. Salamat sa Diyos, hindi po nangyari yon. And it seems that the arrangements arrived at after that incident so far have served both the Philippines and Taiwan in good stead. There are also other countries, for example, like Vietnam, who are in our waters. And just a few days ago, it was reported, but I stress, Mr. President, reported that they were also supposedly militarizing waters in the West Philippine Sea. That report, actually, Mr. President, for the record, is now subject of investigation, whether it is a true report of a true incident o kung kuryente yon. That's what I hear from our kababayan in the media. That is the subject of their fact-finding right now, Mr. President.
So let me just clarify. So we do believe officially we are with the one China policy. So I agree with the lady senator that yes, we had a problem with Taiwan dahil meron din po silang claim. And of course, China is saying yun din ang claim nila. But we also have a dispute with Vietnam and Malaysia. So ang question ko po, if tayo lahat ay may dispute dyan, bakit po sa resolution na to, China lang po ang ating tinutukoy, or why are we concentrating only or limiting this resolution to China? Why don't we also ask the UN to look into why Vietnam and Malaysia are intruding into our waters?
Mr. President, good gentlemen, the sole subject of the resolution urging the Philippine government through the Department of Foreign Affairs to sponsor a resolution before the UN General Assembly is China, because it was China who was also, aside from the Philippines, the subject of that landmark ruling in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which said that there was no legal basis for China to claim historic rights to resources within the sea areas falling within the 9-dash line. Kahit pa po siguro tignan natin o pagsama-samahin ang Taiwan, ang Vietnam, ang Malaysia, or any other countries with which we have had any incident or troubles in the West Philippine Sea in the past many years, siguro po mas konti pa yung mga insidenteng iyon kahit itotal po natin at posibleng mas mild kumpara sa dami at sa tindi at sa pagkatuloy-tuloy ng mga insidenteng pinagdudusahan ng ating bansa, ating Navy, ating mangingisda, ating kalikasan pa nga sa kamay ng China. Besides, Mr. President and good gentlemen, this is not a question of dispute. This is a question of a questionable legal theory, the 9-dash line. Yun po ang yun po ang ikinaso ng ating gobyerno sa The Hague. Kaya't ganun din ka-specific ang ruling nila. At sinabi ng The Hague, once and for all, na questionabling legal theory talaga ang 9-dash line at hindi basehan para ang kinin ng China yung atin sa Pilipinas.
So we are not questioning the claims, Mr. President, dear Senator. So we're not questioning the legal theory and the claims of Vietnam and Malaysia. Because I can ask the same question. How come we did not bring to the Permanent Court of Arbitration Malaysia and Vietnam?
Mr.
Pareho
President,
naman po, di ba? All of the three countries are in our waters and all of them are claiming na sa kanila yon.
well, Mr. President, I suppose our government at that time did not do that dahil wala namang pong sinasite na 9-dash line ang Malaysia. Wala naman pong sinasite na 9-dash line ang Vietnam. Lalong walang iniimbentong 9-dash line ang Taiwan. Ang China lamang ang solong nag-imbento, gumagamit ngayon ng 9-dash line para angkinin ang ating katubigan at ang ating mga bahura. Also, Mr. President, as I gave a few examples earlier, other claimants are already talking within the ASEAN Code of Conduct for the South China Sea process. Kaya rin siguro nag-hold so far yung ating kasunduan sa Taiwan after that unfortunate incident. Kaya rin po siguro mas positibo yung mga relasyon natin sa Vietnam at sa Malaysia, pati sa issue ng China at sa marami pang ibang issue sa dagat dahil dito. And we can actually, Mr. President, thank you to the good gentleman for asking why we do not also question the possible legal theories, if there are any of the other claimant countries in the whole of the South China Sea na maaring mayat maya may insidente tayo noon dito sa West Philippine Sea. We could also do so. This resolution does not foreclose the possibility of doing so later, Mr. President.
Maybe if I may add, my distinguished colleague.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. President.
So with the permission of the sponsor and then our good colleague from Taguig Pateros, it's also because we have filed since January about 98 diplomatic protests on their incursions on the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. Unlike Vietnam and Malaysia, where we're already coming up with a code of conduct with freedom of navigation. I think the problem with our friends in China is they do not allow us to navigate in our own territory. If they just allowed us to navigate with our own territory without the constant threat and bombardment with the statement that you are in Chinese territory, you must leave immediately, you are in our shoreline and all that, I think we wouldn't have a problem if they allow their fishermen to fish there in the first place kung pinayagan po nila ang ating mangingisda na mag-isda at gumawa ng livelihood nila sa lugar na yun. Wala siguro tayong problema kung nagkakamayan po tayo with the Coast Guard of China kaysa i-laser tag nila tayo, haharangin nila yung barko natin. I think that's a different story. Other claimant countries are not doing that to us.
Yeah, Mr. President.
I think that's just the information I wanted to share to the body.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
That with the statement of Senator Risa, let's look at the facts. But the fact is, for 3 years during the Duterte administration, nagkakawayan yung Coast Guard ng Pilipinas at ng China. The fact is, it's true, we have very good relationship with Vietnam and Malaysia, pero kasama ang China, hindi pwedeng makipag-usap ang Taiwan diretso sa ASEAN. Ang nakikipag-usap ang China sa Declaration of Conduct, yung Section 5 po, kasama ang China doon, hindi lang ang Vietnam at Malaysia. And it is not true that Malaysia and Vietnam does not tell our Navy that they are in Vietnamese or Malaysian waters. Palapitin mo yung mga barko sa mga hawak ng Malaysia at Vietnam, pareho din sa ginagawa ng Pilipinas, pareho din ginagawa ng China. Let me show you a chart, and let the public decide. No? Can you show how many? Please show on the board how many features are controlled by China, by Malaysia and Vietnam inside our exclusive economic zone, please. May I ask permission to the Senate President that we will put it here.
Please proceed.
So, ayan po, no? Let me put it on my phone so that I can also. So, 4 po ang claim ng China na nasa loob ng EEZ natin. Next slide, please. 11 po ang nasa ng Vietnam. So hindi po totoo na mas grabe po ang isang country over the other, no? Magulo talaga itong dispute na to, no? Next slide. Malaysia has 5 and Taiwan 1, but binibilang yon under China, no? I'll give you an example, no? Number 43, Swallow Reef. Can you show the picture of Swallow Reef? Okay, yan po ang picture ng Swallow Reef. It is militarized. Dekada na po yan. Pinakita na rin po yan ng mga think tank sa US. Hindi po chismis or hindi po bali-balita lang na bago ngayon na ang mga features ng Malaysia at Vietnam ay militarized. Kausapin niyo po Navy at saka ang ating pong Coast Guard, lumapit po kayo dyan, kinausap ko po sila as Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Sasabihan din po sila, you are in Vietnamese waters, you are in Malaysian waters. Di ba? So the truth is, the US think tanks ignored putting that front and center because iba po ang interest ng US sa atin. Sa atin po ang interest natin, sovereignty, territory, and sovereign rights. Ang US po, ang kanilang interest po ay yung freedom of navigation. Ang US po ay hindi nakapirma sa UNCLOS. Ang US po, hindi officially tinatanaw yung pong arbitral award natin because hindi sila signatory sa UNCLOS. I've spoken to people in the White House, I've spoken to senators and members of Congress. Bakit po ang US Joint Patrol hindi nila ino-offer near Vietnam and Malaysia? So that's what I'm saying, Mr. President. But before I continue,
Let me just ask our distinguished colleague, if you can show that in the map of where the vicinity of that particular island is so that we can see the comparison on where it is, no, within the
yes. Well,
the,
Mr. President,
area. Because if it is closer to Malaysia, then I would understand.
no, this is in our EEZ, Mr. President.
Yes, correct. But
So,
it would be nice if
I'll-
somebody could point
Yeah,
it out.
I'll show you all the pictures, Mr. President, but at the end of the interpellation, ang proposal ko po kasi ay dapat po ang National Task Force mag-briefing sa atin sa committee. Because we agree and we are all outraged about the actions of China. But is the UN General Assembly the right forum for us to get justice? I'm not saying it's the wrong forum. What I'm saying is that under our constitution and jurisprudence, the chief architect is the president. It has never been the House or the Senate. So it is the president who will say what is the strategy, where we will go. But Mr. President, with your permission, I'll just show the other pictures. Pakita
In the
natin yung
meantime,
ibang
Mr.
pictures.
President, good gentleman, while the good gentleman is pulling up the other pictures, if I may just make a few comments on some of the important points he has mentioned. Hindi lang iisang bansa ang may interest sa freedom of navigation. As the good Senate President said in his sponsorship speech of this resolution, napakaraming bansa at napakaraming regional formations all over the world ay may interes sa freedom of navigation dahil napakaraming bansa sa buong mundo ay mga coastal nations din. Hindi kasama sa UNCLOS yung isang world power, ganun din. Ang China, hindi rin siya kasama sa UNCLOS. Pero hindi tama na hindi tinatanaw ng mga ibang global powers tulad ng US yung arbitral award. So, it might be ironic, ang US hindi member ng UNCLOS pero kinikilala nila yung ating tagumpay sa The Hague and more countries and regional formations all over the world have done so. In fact, bumebuelo yung international consensus around us. If we talk to the Navy, if we talk to the armed forces, ang sasabihin po nila na yung single na pinakamalaking threat ngayon sa ating national security ay walang iba kundi ang China dahil sa kanyang aggressive action sa atin sa West Philippine Sea. And is the UN General Assembly the right forum? It is one of the right fora. Because I agree with the good gentleman, Mr. President, hindi solong mode of engagement lang tayo. So we hold on to our victory at The Hague. And now, after that historic ruling, or jurisprudence, we are seeking now also the diplomatic and political support of all other member countries in the United Nations. And indeed, the President is the architect of our foreign policy. Kaya nga po, pati sa lengguwahe ng resolution, which I am open to amendments to, Mr. President, for example, in the dispositive portion, dahil sila ang arkitekto ng ating foreign policy. Kaya nga po, ang lengguwahe ng resolusyong ito ay addressed to the Philippine government through the Department of Foreign Affairs. Bilang sila ang alter ego ni Presidente ng arkitekto ng foreign
It's
policy.
just a sense of the
Yes,
Senate.
Mr. President.
It is a sense of the Senate
Opo.
asking our executive department, who is the chief policy maker, particularly the president, to take action on this.
Yes, Mr. President.
We'll
Basically,
go to
yun-
that, Mr. President. Now, may we show the Vietnam. Start tayo dun sa picture, no? Ito Vietnam, ito po ang Quezon Reef. Meron pong ZPU-57-2 anti-aircraft artillery, may open radar, may armed personnel at gun encampment, may air raid shelter, may battle tank with personal manning, meron po itong dish antenna, meron pong gun emplacement with personal manning ng QJZ-89 12.77mm HMG, meron pong battle tank with personal manning inside sa kabilang side. Next slide. You have the Vietnam occupied Bailang K. It has a lighthouse, newly constructed temporary shelter a few years ago pa to. Gun emplacement concrete bunker, two-story rectangular concrete with solar power heater installed on the roof. It has speedboats, trenches, open array radar, battle tank gun shelters. Next slide. Observation tower with solar panels, open array radar, napakalapit sa atin bansa to. Antenna for mobile phones, it has a battle tank, ongoing construction of trenches, it has personal work. Ito po ay sa Sincoe, East Reef, Vietnam. Next slide. Ito po yung Pugad Island. Sa Pugad Island po may gun shelter, makikita nyo po may quay siya, meaning pwede pong pumasok yung iba't ibang klaseng ships nila. Meron din pong reclamation yan, may helipad, may ZPU-57-2 anti-aircraft artillery, may battle tanks, etc. So, just as we go through this, no, it will show
but my
you...
dear colleague, no, if I may, nainggit nga ako sa Vietnam eh. Nainggit ako sa kanila. Actually, these military fortifications is not because of us. It's also because of China.
No, that is in
To
our
be honest,
EEZ.
their number one aggressor in that particular
No,
portion
Mr.
is
President,
also with China.
I take exception to that. You know why?
How come?
That is in our EEZ. So
Yes.
you cannot say that that's only against China, that's also against us. If our military goes near Kalansiao K now, the Vietnamese tell us that is Vietnamese land. So meaning if we win and suddenly China leaves the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, hindi po tayo ang makakakuha ng aalisan ng China. Ang
Then,
Malaysia,
Mr. President.
May I just finish?
Yes, Mr. President.
Historically kasi, yung pushback ng Vietnam has been very successful when it came to Chinese aggression on the West Philippine Sea. So, as a matter of fact, we had a whole delegation, I'm not sure if you joined us, when we had the delegation of the Vietnamese Parliament and Speaker of the Vietnamese Parliament with us here, the Communist Parliament of Vietnam, with a lengthy discussion upstairs in our ceremonial hall on how they really push back.
Yes.
And they really do not allow.
agree,
that
Mr.
kind of
President. And I communicated that to the US, that Vietnam can give a bloody nose to any of its enemies.
Yeah, anyone.
That's why magdadalawang isip ka, just like Mig Subiri who has a black belt, magdadalawang isip ka makipagsuntukan. But the problem is that the military equipment given to us, walang weaponry. And in the $680 million South China Sea Fund in 2017-2018, it was Vietnam at Malaysia ang malaking nakuha, hindi Pilipinas. So, Mr. President, I'm not saying nakalaban natin ang Vietnam at Malaysia. Ha? Vietnam and Malaysia are our allies as of now, but they're also claimants. And what I'm saying is that they have a clear strategy. Improve their economy, bilaterally negotiate with China, and then build their defenses. So what I'm saying is that two of them, hindi natin pwedeng ignore. Let's go to the Malaysian-held features. No, this is swallowed.
Mr. President and good gentlemen.
May I just finish
Just about Vietnam, good gentlemen, before we move on to your
Yes.
photos about Malaysia. Of course, Mr. President, the good gentleman could also sponsor a resolution calling on the DFA to file a case in the Permanent Court of Arbitration against Vietnam. This resolution is not mutually exclusive to that. Dahil sa dulo po, Mr. President, we stand for Philippine sovereignty.
Yeah, I could, Mr. President, but it would do no good. You know, that's the point. The point of diplomacy, lalo po kung wala pong world power na mag-enforce, is that we have to align a policy with strategy that something that can actually get done. And when
But
we
Mr.
compare
President-
Mr. President, may I finish? If you compare the strategy of of the Aquino administration and the Duterte administration, makikita nyo po sa Aquino administration nawalan tayo ng territory, na take over po ang Scarborough. Sa Duterte administration, ni isang square inch po, walang nawala sa atin. In the Aquino administration, and it's not the fault of President Aquino, it was the strategy and the people implementing the strategy. Ang isang strategy po doon, hindi makipag-usap sa China, nakikipag-usap po sa multilateral, hindi po nakapasok ang ating fishermen around Scarborough. During the Duterte administration, nakapasok po tayo doon. Bakit po? Kasi po nag-uusap bilaterally, which is in the arbitration award, meron po, it is in UNCLOS, and it is also in the declaration of yung conduct. Yung binabanggit kanina po ng the good Senator Ontiveros, binabanggit niya nag-uusap kasi sa ASEAN. Kasi po may DOC, no? And yung DOC na yon should go to the Code of Conduct, COC. And China is working with ASEAN with that. But ang sabi ng China, wag tayo mag-multilateral sa iba because the other world powers have other interests. And if you look at Malaysian and Vietnamese strategy, they are talking with ASEAN and with China. They are not going to the Court of Arbitration, nor are they going to the UN General Assembly. That's what I'm saying. I'm
So
not saying it's a
therefore-
wrong strategy. I'm saying you can look back in history and see the results of the two. And I'm saying that the Senate should tread carefully and get the right information, kompletuhin. Kasi kanina lang, sinabi ni Senator Ontiveros, hindi naman ganun kasi ang Malaysia at Vietnam. But now with the pictures, makikita nyo. Yung iba sa atin dito, hanggang ngayon, nagugulat. When I briefed the military, some in the military, especially if they're not in the Navy, hindi nila alam na ganito din ang sitwasyon. Some of the U.S. Members of Congress did not know that the U.S. was favoring Vietnam and Malaysia. That's why when President Obama went to Japan at tinanong siya in the dispute of the islands between China and Japan, if China tries to access that island, will it automatically trigger Section 5, which is the Mutual Defense Treaty? Sabi ni Obama, yes. Then he went to the Philippines, tinanong siya, kung may problema dito sa South China Sea at etong mga exclusive economic zone natin and everything, no? Will it trigger Section 5 of our Mutual Defense Treaty? Ang sagot ni Obama, no. So may I correct, just for the record, Senator Ontiveros, US is not a signatory to UNCLOS. They congratulate us on the award, but it is not their national policy to implement the award.
That is exactly what I said, Mr. President.
Yes,
That like
China,
the US, China is not a member of the UNCLOS.
No, China is a member of UNCLOS, Senator.
Pero di tulad ng China, kahit hindi miyembro ng UNCLOS ang US, kinikilala niya yung
No.
arbitral award natin.
That's not correct, Mr. President. The China is a member of UNCLOS. Ang Amerika hindi member ng UNCLOS.
Yun na nga po
Ang
sinabi ko,
Amerika,
Mr. President.
fini-cheer yung decision, pero hindi niya policy na i-implement yung decision.
Actually,
So
Mr.
we
President,
talked directly with the
gentlemen.
US and told the US, give us a contractor, a service contractor, we will build for oil, send us a ship na bantayan. Ang sagot nila, hindi yan sa policy namin. But
Mr. President, good
we won sa,
gentleman.
may I finish my sentence? So the point is, the good senator was saying freedom of navigation sa lahat. Ang number one na may interest sa freedom of navigation, magugulat man tayo, is China. Bakit po? Because 80% ng ekonomiya ng China ay nasa coastal areas niya. And mostly malapit sa atin yung southern, di ba? So actually, yung sinasabi ng US na freedom of navigation, yun din ang gusto ng China. Ang unang magsasuffer kung may gera around the South China Sea is China. Ang pangalawang magsasuffer tayo kasi maiipit tayo sa gitna eh. Ang Malaysia at Vietnam ay meron pong strategy na nakikipag-away sila sa China sa territory nila pero hindi po sila gumigitna sa dalawang superpower na US at saka
Ang
China.
problema natin siguro dyan, Senator Cayetano, is magandang makipag-usap kung yung kausap mo ay matino. Sa totoo lang. Ang problema, kausap ni President Marcos, first state visit niya ay China. Nakausap niya po si President Xi And during that meeting, they were very cordial, very friendly, and ang sabi po nila, they will continue to engage on freedom of navigation or movement within the West Philippine Sea. Wala pang ilang linggo na dumaan, ayun na po yung pag-take over na po ng green lighting or mga
Green laser.
harassment ng ating mga white ships po ito, Coast Guard and our fisher folk. As a matter of fact, since then, the President has called the ambassador several times to Malacanang. If you ask me, I would have been more harsh, actually. So, mahirap ang kumausap sa isang bansa na hindi mo naman matino. You started with your speech by saying that it was a phrase from the Bible. Fortunately, our friends in China do not believe in God, and nor do we believe in the Bible. Because I remember talking to one and I said, "Are you Buddhist?" Sabi niya, "No, I'm communist." So wala silang pinapaniwala na Diyos. So tayo, naniniwala po tayo sa Diyos, takot po tayo kay Allah and to God. Mahirap kausapin yung isang bansa na hindi po takot sa kay Allah o kay God kasi wala po silang
Mr. President.
pinapaniwala.
Mr. President,
I will just end by saying, I'll just end this statement by saying this. If there were goodwill measures being done by that particular country to our discussions and negotiations, di wala po sana tayong problema. Unfortunately, even in our embassy here, nangyari na sa akin yan. Ako hindi naman nabudol, pero I was thrown under the bus when he told me something about Pogo and I shared it to everybody. Ang sabi niya, kasinungalingan, ay pala, totoo pa lang sinabi niya, and I can prove it with the witnesses that were with me there. Then a month after, about the incident of the Navy boat, yung kinuha nila, yung debris from the Chinese rocket that fell, sabi nila it was a mutually understood, mutual understanding where they gladly gave us the debris to take back to China. And lumabas yung video, sinisigawan, naubusan nga ng English yung ating Navy frogman.
Well, Mr.
Galit na
President.
galit siya. Ang ginagawa nyo, what are you doing? Tapos, we have it here. It was shown in video here. So these are the things that does not happen with Vietnam, nor does it happen with Malaysia, because we have a mutual respect for one another.
Mr. President, that is
So-
my point
President,
precisely.
My
Mr. Pres-
point is,
my-
it's very hard to talk
No,
to
my
another
point
party.
precisely, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Malaysia and
gentlemen.
Vietnam. Let me address the Senate President because he addressed my comments.
Well, I'm trying
So-
to address the good gentleman's many points that are
Yeah,
accumulating.
well,
Mr.
sorry,
President.
Senator Antiveros. I was just also addressing your points. Actually, hindi pa tapos ipakita yung pictures ng Malaysia. No? But yung point ni Senate President, Sir Senate President, as I said, I share with you the outrage. I share with you the frustration, ba't nangyayari to, ba't kinausap ng Presidente. But I also see the historical past. Ng panahon ni President Duterte, layer after layer ng communication hanggang maayos to prevent. I don't know if this chamber was informed. There was even a time for almost 2 months, mahigit 1 month. Hindi nagsasagutan ng telepono ang ating Coast Guard at China. Pero during the Duterte administration, pinagbawal ng both sides na hindi sagutin ng both sides yung telepono ng Coast Guard. Kasi sabi nila, di ba na mag-away yung gray ship, yung hindi pwede na yung Coast Guard na kung saan may emergency, hindi nag-uusap. So my point is, Mr. President, precisely why it's not happening between the Philippines and Malaysia at Vietnam, but it's also not happening between Vietnam and Malaysia and China is because they found a way to work it out without other superpowers and may malinaw na usapan. Is Vietnam and Malaysia satisfied? Of course not, because they believe it's theirs. Are we satisfied? No also. But I'm saying, Mr. President, in our desire to do something, we have to ask first, tama po ba nasa UNGA? Secondly, in our desire to do something against the biggest one, dahil mas malaki ekonomiya, mas marami sila, mas malakas ang kanilang Navy, do we ignore our problems naman with Vietnam and Malaysia? And lastly, Mr. President, yes, mali kung nagsabi ang China na hiningi nila. But again, I mentioned this to the majority leader. Under international law, kung meron kang something in space at mahulog, hindi pwede kunin ng ibang country yon. The only thing you can do is inform that country at sila kukuha. So kung may nahulog galing sa satellite ng China sa Pilipinas, ang obligasyon ng Pilipinas, tawagan ng China at kunin. Hindi rin pwedeng makipag-agawan ang tao natin. Baliktarin man natin ang sitwasyon. Sinabi ni Pangulong Marcos, may dalawa tayong bagong satellite. Pag yan po nahulog, let's say in between the waters of Hong Kong and mainland, we cannot get it. The Chinese cannot get it. They're obligated to tell us. Ngayon, kung may miscommunication or they lied to us, mali, I do not excuse that. No? I was a very tough negotiator. Grabe po ang mga sinabi ko behind closed doors because yun po ang instruction ni President Duterte. Remember, a diplomat cannot say anything of his personal opinion. Only that of the instructions of the chief diplomat. So that's what my point here today, Mr. President. The chief diplomat has not stated that he wants this taken up sa UN. And yes, we're not a rubber stamp. And yes, may sariling pag-iisip ang Senate. Pero ang konstitusyon mismo nagsasabi na dapat ang presidente ang may diskarte at jurisprudence ay nagpapatunay nun. Sabi po dito, Pimentel versus Executive Secretary, GR 158088, July 6, 2005. In our system of government, the president, being the head of state, is regarded as the sole organ and authority in external relation and is the country's sole representative with foreign nations. This would put the Senate and executive in an awkward position and could cause embarrassment in the Senate if the president orders the DFA not to file the resolution. On the other hand, if it is going to file the resolution, why not hear this in committee, get the input of the National Task Force, get the input of 24 senators, and strengthen it? There's another question of, is it the General Assembly or is it the Security Council? Because in cases where peace is at stake, the Security Council has the authority. Or is it a case of implementation? So should we go back to the permanent court of arbitration? So that's my point, Mr. President. Even I'm not saying malito, but I'm not also saying tama. Bakit? Hindi ko po naririnig kung anong instructions ng presidente sa DFA. Hindi ko pa po naririnig ang ambassador natin sa US. Ano yung sinasabi niyang bagong guarantee ni President Biden? Iyan po ba ay guarantee sa freedom of navigation lang or pwede na tayo mag-dig for oil? Pwede na tayo mag-drill? So this is such a complex, but I would agree with you, Mr. President. I see your passion. I talk to you in the back in your office and you are just, full of frustration na ang linaw naman na sa atin to. But as I'm saying, Mr. President, Malaysia has its frustrations, Vietnam has its frustrations, even China sometimes has its frustrations with other countries, with world powers, and even with dealing with us. For example, Mr. President, meron tayong meron tayong agreement, walang magtatayo. There was a time that some of our fishermen with some of our personnel tried to put nipa hats, sabi pahingahan lang daw. So syempre nag-react yung China. And magalit man yung iba, tama sila mag-react. Bakit? Pumirma po si Blas Ople dun sa ASEAN sa agreement na pagbakante yung mga island, mga features, wala muna magtatayo ng kahit ano. And President Duterte asked me, Alan, ba't tayo hindi pwede magtayo ng kubo? Para lang naman shelter ng fishermen yon. Sir President, I will give you 2 reasons bakit hindi pwede. Number 1, yung Declaration of Conduct. Number 2, yun ang ginawa ng Chinese eh. Sabi nila kubo lang, then ngayon punong-puno na. So alam na nila yung style na yon, kaya worry sila pag yung iba. So do I condemn them for doing that? Yes. Dapat yan wala. Dapat walang nakatayo sa mga island na yan. Tayo lang po, sa lahat ng claimant, tayo lang po ang disente, so to speak. Bakit po? Basic lang ang binibigay natin sa ating mga militar na nandun. Hindi natin minimilitarize to the point na it becomes a threat to our neighbors. But as the pictures would show, the Malaysian pictures, the Vietnam, this is a threat to our national security. Meron na pong submarines ang Vietnam at Malaysia. Pag ang China po ay nag-retreat at umalis dun sa mga islands na hawak po nila, malaki po ang problema natin. Bakit? Ngayon po yung consensus madali kasi malaki yung China. So madaling sabihin po, bully sila. Pero po ang Malaysia is smaller than us. So if we have a dispute with Malaysia, what will the US say? And will we be the bully or will Malaysia be the bully? Ganon din sa Vietnam. So, Mr. President,
yes.
the point I want to make, no, and I can wrap up or we can continue, is that I really appeal to you, to the body. Let us fully take this up in the committee. Kung kailangan 2 linggo, araw-araw, lahat ng briefing, kung kailangan in your chamber, kausapin din natin yung Chinese ambassador if we have to get think tanks from Southeast Asia, because it's just so important. And I guarantee you, no, if we simply pass this resolution, tapon lang natin sa UNGA, madi-disappoint tayo. Because history has proven what I'm saying, na the UNGA is for consensus. It is not for highly contentious issues like this.
Mr.
It may
President,
may not work,
gentlemen.
but just my last point, Madam. Sir, my last point is, it's so important that if we don't get all the information, study it well, and maybe help the DFA craft the resolution itself, kung yun ang decision natin, baka maging negative pa sa atin to later on. So let me stop there, and thank you for your patience, Senator Tiveros and Senate President.
Thank you, good gentleman, Mr. President. Sa dami namang importanteng punto, malamang may mga nalimutan na ako, but allow me to begin with 2 of the important last questions raised by the good gentleman from Taguig and Pateros. Tama ba pumunta sa UNGA? Ang UNGA ba o ang UN mismo ay para sa consensus building and not for conflict resolution or not for upholding yung katamaan ng posisyon ng isang bansa na nanalo na ng kaso? Actually, if we examine history, Mr. President, tama din na i-consider nating pumunta sa UNGA. For example, Mr. President, the Nicaraguan government went to the UN General Assembly to enforce the International Court of Justice or ICJ decision against the US. So Nicaragua, isang maliit na bansa din tulad natin, ang katapat niya sa pinagdesisyonan ng isang international court, ICJ in that case, ay isang dambuhalang bansa rin, ang US noon, tulad natin ngayon sa China. They won in the ICJ, ayaw sumunod ng US to cease and desist in its activities around and inside Nicaragua, kaya dumulog ang Nicaragua sa isang katulad na resolusyon sa UNGA, and they were upheld by the United Nations General Assembly. So, hindi mutually exclusive itong iba't ibang ginagawa ng gobyerno natin noon at maaring gawin ngayon. Pangalawa, do we ignore the problems with other countries? No. In fact, earlier I said that the good gentleman could also request the DFA to file a case before the PCA vis-a-vis our relations with Vietnam. Hindi po mutually exclusive itong ating resolution ngayon at ang ganyang posibleng course of action. Sinabing walang teritoryo nung nakaraang mga taon. That is arguable, and I could research about that and get back to our dear colleagues on that. But yung isang malinaw na nangyari nung nakaraang mga taon which exacerbated the problem for us vis-a-vis China ay dinredge ng China yung ating seabed at ginamit yung ating sariling marine natural resources para maglikha ng mga artificial na isla, i-militarize yung mga iyon at i-claim na kanila. Hindi policy ng US na i-enforce. Actually, hindi naman policy, ni namang ibang mga bansa to enforce a favorable ruling that a country like us has been awarded in a forum like the PCA. It is up to us to continue taking the executive and legislative actions to stake our claim on the ground or in the water. And certainly, yung pagdulog natin sa UN General Assembly, as the Senate may approve it, expressing the sense of the Senate, and as the DFA would be the one to finalize the final language para makalikha ng mas malawak na consensus with other nations in the UNGA, Mr. President, I think is a very reasonable course of action based on principle at based sa nakaraang mga karanasan ng ibang mga bansa din, Mr. President.
Mr. President, yung pong Nicaragua po, Sa ICJ po dinala yon, hindi po sa GA.
Katapos po ng ICJ, sa GA po dinala ng
Let
UN.
me finish, Mr.
No,
President.
just I'm correcting
And-
the fact,
Yes,
Mr.
and I'm
President.
also correcting also your facts. So, the general compulsory jurisdiction of ICJ, nag-withdraw ang US after that. And in fact, ang US, naghintay ng mas friendly na administration sa Nicaragua bago sila nagbayad. At walang nagawa ang GA to enforce, to make sure that US paid. In fact, some writers and some thinkers said, nag-weaken pa nga yung UN noon. Bakit? Kasi pag nagbotohan, so for example, we bring our resolution to the UN. The UN is strongest pag consensus. Ano po ang definition ng consensus sa UN? Ang definition po, walang nag-object ni isa. So sa UN po, pag nagbotohan at wala pong hindi po magbobotohan, sasabihin la it is the consensus of the UN, etc. That's the most powerful sa UN. Pag may isa, magbobotohan. So, if countries close to China vote against us, they will not implement this. It will make our PCA arbitration ruling even weaker.
No, Mr.
Kasi
President.
supposedly, that's the opinion of the good senator. And again, I bring you back to the administration of Duterte and Aquino. Because we'll go back to multilateral and bilateral. No? India and Pakistan have a dispute. One of them wants bilateral, the other one wants multilateral. Senator Aquino here and his father are very frequent sa IPU. Have you ever seen an American congressman or congresswoman or senator there? No. Why? They do not attend these multilateral legislative bodies because they do not want to be bound by them. What I'm saying, Mr. President, is that we cannot say, don't worry, nandyan ang US, they will take care of us. Our relationship
I'm not
with
saying that,
US,
Mr. President.
well, many of the colleagues and allies of Senator Tiveros in the media, whether it was the former Secretary, Justice Carpio, you have given many of your opinion during the Duterte administration. It was all leading to that, no? And even in the CA, no? Even the assurances of our ambassador to the US. Ang eto point ko, the US is a good friend. They're an indispensable ally. People to people sa ating security economy, we should get closer to them. But we should not be anti-US nor anti-China. We should be pro-Philippines. Because iba ang interest ng US sa interest ng Pilipinas, sa interest ng China.
Yes.
Freedom of navigation, pareho tayo sa US. Pero dito sa ating territory and sovereign rights, wala po so far guarantee ang US. Hindi po sila sabi ng US, sige, go ahead. Get the minerals, get the oil. Sagot ko kayo. Wala pong ganon. Kaya nga ang suggestion ni Justice Carpio, makipag-gitgitan tayo at pagka binomba yung ating isang barko, may war na.
Pero may
Kaya nga
just,
sinagot ni President Duterte, di
if I
ikaw ang
may,
sumakay yung
if I may
barko.
interject lang, Senator Alano, you know very much that I am not identified with the political side of Senator Rizzo Ontiveros. We align together on issues.
Agree,
This is
Mr.
an issue
President.
that we align. On this
Yes, Mr.
particular case, I do not have, as a matter of fact, in my speech, I never mentioned about the United States.
Yes.
There's nothing here on my push for this resolution has nothing to do with
I'll
my
clarify that,
friendship
Mr.
with the
President.
United States.
Yes.
I just want to put that on record. And I think the frustration that we feel is the frustration that is felt by the Filipino people. I asked the Pulse Asia for rider questions. 8 out of 10 want us to strengthen militarily against the Chinese push in on the Philippines. Almost 9 out of 10 want the Chinese out of our territory. 9 out of 10, ha? That's 90%.
Hanapin
So-
natin yung one.
so-
Dapat 10 out of 10 yun.
Hindi naman. Meron naman kasi, alam mo naman, meron naman siguro na iba yung paniwala. Ang punto ko dyan, the freedom of navigation is not for the US alone. It's for us. For example, when we try to resupply our marines in Ayungin Shoals, my distinguished colleague, they will not allow a larger ship to pass through. Bangka lang po. Ang ibig sabihin, ang madadala lang nila ay pagkain at kung ano pa mga gamot. Yung my dear colleagues, hindi po sila nagpapadaan ng mas malaking barko because as much as we want to fortify Ayungin Shoals, which is already occupied by Philippine soldiers, Just even to put a tent, they will not agree on. They're acting as if it is their territory already. As a matter of fact, that was the last skirmish we had when our supply boats were trying to send supplies to our Marines in Ayungin Shoals. And if you look at the map, Ayungin Shoals is between Pag-asa Island, which is a municipality of Palawan, and Palawan. It is closer to the Philippines. Yan ang punto ko. It's just so blatant na, alam mo, pag medyo malayo-layo pa, okay lang. It's just practice, medyo malayo din po yan. Ang aking speech kanina was just basically on Mischief Reef, Ayungin Shoal area, and Reed Bank. Before you know it, kanila na po yung El Nido. Before you know it, baka nasa San Vicente na po sila. Before you know it, nasa Aurora side na po sila, which is the Benham
Rice.
Benham Rice. Because they are sending ships there now to the Benham Rice. So I think as a nation, I agree with you, we should discuss this bilaterally. But if all our avenues bilaterally will fail because they refuse to listen to us, as a matter of fact, their foreign ministers, I don't think they have a Foreign Minister Wang, your friend, is no longer there.
No, he has returned.
He has returned?
Wang
Did
is now the foreign
Did he show up
minister.
now? He's back again?
No,
Because
no.
for a while he disappeared.
No, the one that disappeared has been replaced now.
Okay.
And the former foreign minister, state councilor, and member of the Politburo is back.
I'm
Mr.
glad to hear
President,
that. But
I'm
my-
going to yield
to finalize my point is, on the measure you mentioned earlier on Pimentel versus Executive Secretary, it was also held that participation of the legislative branch in the treaty-making process
Yes.
was deemed essential to provide a check on the executive in the field of foreign relations.
Yes.
And yes, the president is the chief architect, but it continues to mention that the Senate may express its opinion on foreign policy. And we've done that
Yes.
in many resolutions in the past.
Mr. President, I will yield to Senator Tolentino. And let me just say that I agree with most of what you said. Ang disagreement natin, ano yung tamang paraan, i-address yon. Nag-agree tayong lahat sa problema. Magkakasama tayo sa issue regardless of political color or administration. What I'm saying is that it's such a big step. And even if we can do it, should we do it without consulting the executive? Because it might weaken us in front of the international community. But let me yield to Senator Tolentino.
President, just
Mr.
a
President, and
mild
with the
interjection.
indulgence of the good gentleman from
Mr. President.
Cavite, if I may just say quickly to the last comment
Because I
of the
have
good
a
gentleman.
5:40 p.m.
Tagigan
boarding now.
Oh,
Just a
morning.
mild interjection.
All right, Mr. President, in
I'm
that
supportive
case.
of this resolution, but if
Where
I
is the
may
dear
be-
colleague from Cavite going to?
If I may be allowed to continue with the interpellation on Monday, Mr. President.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. President.
of course. We may continue.
I had looked forward, Mr. President, to the Senate possibly adopting this resolution today, Mr. President, if possible.
Mr. President,
we
may,
can take
may
it up if,
I make a recommendation that I think,
We're a deliberative body. I said that in my speech on Monday.
Mr. President,
I think
may-
we should allow people to,
Mr. President, may I ask
participate.
that before session Monday, can we take this?
or else I
quick
will be
call?
called again by my minority floor leader for not following my privileged speech.
Sir President, maybe we can take this up on caucus. Do we pass it? Do we bring it to the committee, etc.? So if you want to pass it on Monday and adopt it, then if that's what the majority
May I
wants,
suggest,
at least because Mr. President, I'll just
Yes.
give you one good reason why.
Uh,
Ang pinakamasama kasi is yung mga nakikinig sa atin sa kabilang side, alam yung strategy natin. So marami
That's why I don't
akong
want to put
dapat
it on a
isasagot
committee
sa inyo.
hearing. Yes.
Hindi ko masagot dito because hindi dapat sa publiko. It's not because it's confidential or it's backroom, but just because, you know, parang chess or basketball, tapos yung camera, yung coach, ganito gagawin natin, ha. So if you know, if I may appeal to our colleagues, let's have a short caucus just to discuss it. And of course, kung yun ang gusto ng majority, then we will submit. But at least mapag-usapan natin behind closed doors the implications of not being in sync with the strategy of the president. No? And in this issue, there's no majority-minority with the president. It's Philippine interest.
Although the Senate has stood ground many times by tradition,
Yes.
not always in sync with the executive.
That's true, Mr. President.
The
But
issue of the
independent
VFA,
institution.
when the former president had canceled the VFA, we in the Senate stood
Yes, Mr.
stood
President.
pat,
But that
had
did
the
not
confidence.
weaken our position. But in this case, if we are not in sync, kung sasabihin natin ganito gagawin, sasabihin ng Presidente, DFA, iba gagawin yung ambassador, as a former Secretary of DFA, I have
I
stood
understand
there
your
negotiating.
position as a former secretary.
So we should
Foreign Affairs
strengthen the
Department.
position of the country and I disagree with the president on some issues. I might disagree with him on the China issue, how to deal with China. But I do believe he was the one elected, and we should at least hear out his people, the National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea and the DFA, so that we know where we're going, di ba?
So what we can do is have an early caucus on Monday to discuss this, and we take it up on plenary, if we'll adopt it or amend it. But definitely one thing is for sure. We must condemn this blatant abuse of their bullying tactics against us. We cannot just let this.
Mr. President,
I think we're all agreeable to that.
if the resolution
And for the
simply
record,
states
Mr.
that, we can
President.
pass that right now.
President, good
So, Mr.
gentlemen.
President, may I just
I'm
clarify
just,
that one line lang, no?
I'm just following on the last word of the President that the very point of this resolution is to strengthen further the hand of the Philippines na lalo na ngang lumalakas sa panahon ngayon na dumadami yung mga bansa at dumadami yung mga regional formations who are supporting us in our victory at The Hague.
Mr. President, you can be sincere, but you can be sincerely wrong. So what I'm saying is that if the intention is to condemn and to make a stand, unanimous tayo. Pero pag nagsabi ka na ng strategy, dalhin natin sa UN, kailangan pag-usapan yan kasi may historical background at may mga ahensya at mga in charge na nandun.
Question, my dear colleague. Question, what harm will it take?
It could
For us-
unravel all of the negotiations of a president because if the president agreed, I
But
do
the
not know
president
if,
does not have to agree, Your Honor.
No,
Kasi
sir.
the president will say, we will study it.
well, then China, when we're talking, will say that the Senate wants something else. And so, meaning, Mr. President, if you're dealing with your child and the child comes with you and sabihin, Daddy, sinabi ni Mami, okay na. And then goes to your Mami. Mami, sabi ni Daddy, okay na. So,
Mr.
of course,
President, good
appealing-
gentlemen,
get
I'm
that-
sorry, it's
No, no.
not as simple as that.
No, it's
Maybe
as
I'm
simple as
already
that.
hungry.
You know, but, Mr. President, I stood before these people, no? And
No, but I know,
and
Mr.
China,
Yes.
seeing that united ang Congress at Presidente makes a big difference from seeing that one part of government wants multilateral, the other one wants bilateral, one wants to go to PCA, other. They understand our democracy. But when it's the institution itself that made us stand, ibang usapan na yon.
But Your
Mr.
Honor,
President.
if I may just
Yes,
finish.
Mr. President.
The one thing I noticed with dealing with our friends in China is that they want to discuss it bilaterally because they want to keep it quiet. Once you take it out to the international community, ayaw po nila yan. Unfortunately, all our discussions bilaterally have not been successful.
That's not true, Mr. President.
Well, during your time, yes.
Judiciary,
During
there
your
were-
time,
and
yes.
I will tell you the reasons why behind closed doors. Because there are reasons for that. So my point, Mr. President, once sinabi ni President Bongbong, hindi, dalhin natin sa UN, eto tayo, multilateral, then we're free to agree or disagree and ano. Pero yung uunahan natin siya na hindi pa niya alam, of course, that's our privilege. But sometimes you withhold your privilege because it is better for those who are negotiating. For all I know, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, because Secretary Manalo is an old hand, very much respected yan around the world, no? And he knows Minister Wang Yi. For all we know, they are renewing ties and they're bringing up certain issues. For all we know, I do not know. That's why I want to know. I want to hear the National Task Force, and I want what Senator Risa is pushing. Actually, they've been consistent. They pushed that during the Aquino administration. They pushed that during the Duterte administration. She might be right, she might be wrong. But it deserves a discussion. That's what I'm saying, Mr. President.
Yeah, I think what would be fair is that we have a caucus about this on Monday, 3 p.m.
Mr. President, with the indulgence of our distinguished colleagues, I'm being scolded by our most senior member of the Senate. That's just a joke, Mr. President. Not
You're
scolding.
being informed by our
Not
member
scolding,
of
Mr. President.
the-
Yeah. But the voice is kind of
this body. Yes.
in body language, Mr. President, is kind of intimidating. Kind of, Mr. President.
We would like to
just a joke,
recognize
Mr.
with the
President.
permission of the of course, the last say will be the sponsor because she's being interpolated.
Of course, Mr.
But
President.
if, with her permission, we can recognize Senator Lauren Legarda.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just allow me to state that I was not trying to intimidate the majority leader. That's the last thing I would want to do. I was majority leader more than 20 years ago. I simply wanted to echo and join in the conversation first. All of us in this hall today, Mr. President, 24 elected senators agree that we must uphold the arbitral ruling of 2016 unequivocally. There is no question about that. In fact, I am one of 4 authors in the Maritime Zone Act, which I believe is also going to be co-authored by Senator Tolentino. And I have a 20-page message which will be read in the University of the Philippines in a forum on the UNCLOS, on our arbitral ruling, and on the Maritime Zones Act, and on the Blue Economy Bill, which was included as a priority of the President in the State of the Nation last Monday. What am I saying? All these debates boil down to a full support of the arbitral ruling that the Philippines, of course, must exercise our rights in our exclusive economic zone, must fight for our fisher folks, must fight for freedom of navigation, and we appreciate the support of the international community. I believe that there is a process and a strategy for information dissemination and how to allow other countries to give us greater support. I am reminded by the minority leader that we had supported the DFA in an information, education, and communications campaign on the Hague ruling. So let us join the DFA in this so that every Filipino, not just in Palawan, not just families of fisher folks, would understand the importance of this historic ruling. However, to demand that our Department of Foreign Affairs, or to urge them to do an action that we have not yet fully discussed and comprehensively discussed with them, as well as the National Security Council, as well as perhaps the Coast Guard and other agencies of government. I would want to ensure that the ruling, which has been acknowledged by the world in very clear terms, will not be diminished even for half a point. So what am I saying? Hindi po tayo nag-aatubili sa ating pananaw na napakahalaga ang pagpapatupad ng Hague ruling. Ngunit kailangan po ang stratehiya ay hindi lahat binabasa o sinasabi sa pampubliko dahil, gaya ng sinabi ni Senator Cayetano, naririnig tayo ng kalaban o yung mga taong naghihimasok sa ating karagatan. And so I wanted to ask questions of the good sponsor just for elucidation.
Mr.
Oh,
President,
you have the floor.
no, I have to go, so
Yes.
may I just say one line?
I thought it was.
No, I will yield to you with the
Yes.
permission of the good senator. I just want to end and then resume on Monday, if permitted, with my conversation with Senator Bato. No, he's a military, a police commander. No, he will not tell anyone to do an operation na hindi muna niya kinonsult yung commander. So we're asking DFA to file a resolution sa UN, pero hindi pa natin tinatanong yung DFA, tama bang strategy? Kamusta ba ang timpla sa UN? Sino ba kakampi natin sa UN? So yun lang po, sa issue
After this.
na territory natin to, sovereignty, nagkakaisa po tayo doon. dun po tayo sa tamang strategy. So if you want to pass the resolution, Mr. President, no, strongly expressing our outrage with what's happening sa West Philippine Sea, I think unanimous tayo.
Yes.
But baliktarin po natin, baliktarin. If I say the resolution should be, do not file a resolution, you would also disagree. So sa akin lang, Mr. President, let's not go into the strategy without asking the actual people who will bring it to the United
I
Nations.
think the gist of what we are discussing today is how, kung paano po natin condemn niya itong pangyayaring ito at may aksyon na ilalabas. Kasi ako bilang Senate President, marami na po tayong resolution na ipasa, and I was Majority Leader, marami na tayong resolution na ipasa. Naubusan na tayo ng ink at papel sa kakapasa ng resolution at privilege speech dito. Ano ba ang kalalabasan nitong lahat ng condemnation na ito? So I think it's not just a matter of condemning. It's like the 98 protests that we filed. By the end of the year, it probably be 250 protests. If it's not if nothing's happening and our people are still being harassed, what steps can we take short of going to war? Because the only step that we can take is to buy more gray ships and white ships, put missile systems in our islands, and fortify Ayungin Shoals and all that. That is already one step towards a conflict with China. So, yung gusto natin, ano ba ang kalalabasan natin dito? Mapapaos lang ba tayo sa kakasigaw dito sa Senado? O meron ba tayong pwedeng ibigay na rekomendasyon sa gobyerno na sa tingin natin ay para maitigil na po itong harassment na ito? Yun lamang po.
Yeah, Mr.
I just
President,
don't want
Mr.
to make it fall on deaf ear.
And Mr. President, before we continue with the interpellation, may I make of record what I started to tell the SP on the floor earlier, that we can even choose to amend the dispositive portion of the resolution to leave the strategy to the DFA, which is what would naturally happen, but to make it explicit there. But the condemnation, as the other colleagues have said, must be unequivocal, and the need to uphold the 2016 ruling clear, Mr. President.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr.
That's good.
President, that's a very clear signal that all of us agree with each other that and as far as condemnation is concerned, we are outraged with what's happening in
But
our.
what's next? My question, dear Majority Leader.
What is our
next?
what is our call
We
to
wear our
action, Mr.
salbabida and
President?
head there and have a hearing.
What is our call to
What is our call to action? Your Honor.
Mr. President, sorry, but
Yes,
distinguished gentleman from
Gentleman from Davao
Senator
and Bohol.
This is just interjection.
Is recognized,
President.
Senator
This is not an
Batol.
interpellation because the next to interpellate is the distinguished Senate
So
President.
who would you want me to? Who would you want me?
The gentleman from
record?
Davao, Senator Bato de la Rosa, would just like to interject, Mr. President.
Yes, our distinguished colleague, Senator Bato de la Rosa, is recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Madam Sponsor. Just a short interjection, Mr. President. Lahat naman tayo dito ay nagkakaisa, no? Na tayo galit na galit sa pambubuli ng China sa ating mga fisherman at sa ating mga kasundaluhan, mga Navy natin, Coast Guard, yung kailang ginagawa. Lahat tayo galit. Pero I'll just give you a scenario, Mr. President. You can just imagine the level of frustration, the level of outrage that we will experience. Kung magkatotoo yung nabasa ko sa news na sinabi nila that China is planning to tow away the BRP Sierra Madre
Yes, totoo yun.
away from the Ayungin Shoal.
Oh.
If that will happen, Mr. President, sobra na talaga, para na tayong mga, ano to, I can imagine, para na tayong mga ipis na inapak-apakan na ng mga tao na ito kapag yan ay gagawin pa nila. Awang-awa na nga tayo sa mga Marines natin na walang natitirahan doon, walang shelter, kundi yung nakadits lang doon, na grounded na BRP Sierra Madre na puno ng kalawang. Kung makita mo yung mga Marines natin doon, maiiyak ka sa sitwasyon nila. At may plano pa ang China na hihilain daw yun, tatanggalin, paalisin doon. So, sobra na yan, Mr. President. Iniisip ko talaga, as a Filipino, hindi ko ma-imagine kung gawin pa nila yan. Wala na nga ibang matirahan yung sundalo natin doon, mga marino natin. Hihilain pa nila, palayo. At anong gagawin nila? Pakilo nila? Pakilo nila yung barko natin?
Ang balita po, Senator De La Rosa, is inano na, sinurround na po nila yung Ayungin shows. They're surrounded now. Pag nakita mo sa ating, as a matter of fact, nagbigay po tayo ng aeroplano sa BIFAR, na caravan, Cessna caravan, at nagpipicture taking na po sila doon sa area na yun. The Ayungin shows is now surrounded by militia ships. Okay. Ang sabi daw nila, isang bagyo na lang yan. Pag may tumamang bagyo, sila daw magre-rescue sa ating mga Marines kasi wala makalapit eh. At pag-rescue daw nila ng Marines, kanila na yon. Yan ang balitang plano. So ang akin dyan, kung mangyayari talaga yan, sa tingin ko, I don't know.
Kaya nga po, Mr. President and good gentleman from Davao, wag na po natin intayin yung ganyang sitwasyon. Simple lang yung resolution, simpleng for the consideration of the Senate, simpleng nananawagan tayo sa DFA na mag-file ng resolution
To do
sa
something.
UN General Assembly. Opo, kung gawin nila, kung hindi nila gawin, kung i-delay muna nila habang kino-consider, at least nasabi lang natin ang sense of the Senate na ayaw nating intayin ang isang bagyo na i-rescue kuno ng China na nagbubuli sa atin sa West Philippine Sea ang ating sariling mga magigiting na Marines bilang cover para hatakin nila ang BRP Sierra Madre. So, the resolution is so simple, so clear, may precedent sa kasaysayan ng mga ibang maliliit na bansa tulad natin at simpleng nananawagan sa DFA, syempre para sa kanilang konsiderasyon. Dahil separate and co-equal branches, hindi naman natin sila pinipilit, pinapahayag lang natin yung ating sentiment na ayaw natin na magkaroon ng ganyang klaseng mga sitwasyon, Mr. President, good gentleman.
We can discuss
Davao.
that in the caucus on Monday.
Very
Yeah,
short,
please,
very short,
continue,
Mr. President.
Senator.
Very short, very short.
Go, please, your
Yeah, I sympathize with the good sponsor of this mission. Talagang I share her outrage, I share her frustration, but also I also share the diskarte of Senator Alan Cayetano para maganda yung ating estratehiya para hindi tayo maisahan ng ating mga kalaban. So, silang dalawa po, I agree, both of them. Wag lang kayo magtampo sa akin, basta kayong dalawa, nakikinig ako sa inyo. I admire your efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
I think the resolution can be amended further to state that we need action from the
Exactly.
Department of Foreign Affairs.
Exactly, Mr.
Yes,
President.
okay.
Mr. President, may we recognize the distinguished Senate President Pro Tempore for her interpellation?